This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What's going on, people? It is Monday, September 27th, 2021, and you are currently tuned into the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast. If you're checking the show out for the first time and you want to stay posted with all future FSWR content, got 2 weekly shows for your viewing pleasure each week. The Monday shows going forward are pretty much for the next month or so. We're going to circle around reports on AEW Rampage, NWA Powerrr, and the G1 Climax 31 tournament. And the Friday recap shows are going to cover NXT TV, AEW Dynamite, and, continuation of the G1. And the G1 reports are pretty much going to be consistent for probably about the next month or so, because I think the dates for those are set through October 19th of this year. So, if that sounds like something you're down for and you like variety and spice in your wrestling podcasts, and this is the show for you. I'm a straight shooter here, though, so be forewarned. If you don't like hearing controversial opinions or bluntness from your podcast hosts, you may want to check out another platform. But I think you will quite enjoy the content we got here. As always, I'll get the prelim junk out of the way first. Make sure you subscribe, like the video, and comment. Make sure you guys check out my Rumble page. Link for that is always in the description box. If you want to watch my content over on Rumble, I will be sure to always leave the episode link in the description as well. And make sure you guys go over to www.chairshot.com and check out my weekly article content that I write for the Chairshot website. Opinion articles are written every week from me, ranging from various topics to AEW, to WWE, to NXT, to NWA, to whatever's a hot button issue at the moment. All you have to do there is head over to the site, click the opinion tab, and you usually find my work labeled under the name Star. I try to get between 3 and 4 articles each week, depending on time availability and, quite frankly, if there's even anything notable to write about. And like the Rumble deal, I will always be sure to leave a link to my most recent publication so you can get a quick sample of the content that I'm writing. Before we run down the recaps, I guess I should point this out too. Yes, I was aware that WWE had an Extreme Rules pay-per-view last night, and judging by the reaction from a lot of people, it doesn't sound like I missed a whole lot. I did watch some of the highlights of the Finn Balor poltergeist shit that everyone was fuming about, just in time for him to snap the top turnbuckle and collapse in the middle of the ring and get pinned after Reigns speared him. Sounds like Finn Balor needs to lay off the Twinkies. But, it sounds about something I'd see on a WWE pay-per-view in 2021. But, discounting that whole fiasco, the card, to me, looked pretty much like one giant Raw TV format. Maybe discounting the main event. And, it also helps, too, if you're going to run a pay-per-view called Extreme Rules. Maybe you want to, have a couple hardcore matches on there and not just a bunch of singles and tags. Just saying. But, if there's anything else on that show beyond the Reigns-Balor match worth my time, let me know. I have a Peacock subscription, so it's not like I'd have to, find some illegal stream of it or something like that. If it is really worth my time going back and watching the show, let me know. But based on the reporting, it doesn't seem like it really is worth my time. But don't you worry, because we've got the Rampage report to go over, and believe me, WWE ain't the only company with problems at hand. So, now that I've kind of inadvertently transitioned, let's just dive right into the show. We begin with Powerhouse Hobbs versus CM Punk. Not a blowaway match, but I didn't really have a whole lot wrong with anything they did. The work was solid. You could tell Punk probably laid out a good chunk of the match, kept things very basic, but the dynamics of the match are what made this work. Hobbs should be working as a monster heel. Shouldn't be doing flip dives, shouldn't be doing crowd-pleasing athletic high spots. No, fuck that. He should be doing exactly what he did in this match. Bully Punk around for a while, work him over, dominate and control the offense, get heat, and let Punk sell and build sympathy for the comeback. So that was well done. Best thing in this match by far was the commentary team with Taz and Ricky Starks. I especially loved their commentary during the comeback when Punk hit the flying elbow drop. Taz and Ricky are practically shitting themselves as Punk goes for the cover. Hobbs kicks out at like 2.5, and Taz just goes, all good. Wasn't even an ear fall. Taz is so great. Obviously, there was the cringy spot on the top rope that everyone was talking about, and I mean, honestly, you can't even really blame either guy. Hobbs was holding Punk upside down while Punk was trying to pull himself up so he could hit the Hurricane Rana, and for whatever reason, Hobbs just couldn't get a good rotation, and he landed right on top of his head. But he powered through it. No pun intended there. Fast forward to the end, Hook tries to run interference on the apron. Hobbs takes him out. Punk gets him up for the GTS and gets the pin. Kind of a telegraph finish. I don't think anyone had any doubt that Punk wasn't going over. It was a good placeholder match for Punk. Obviously, they're pretty high on Hobbs, too, to be featuring him in that capacity. So, I think they're doing all the right things with him. I don't know if they're going to keep the Team Taz thing going for a while, if maybe they're just blowing it off now. I think a CM Punk versus Ricky Starks match would be a good match to see down the line as well, but I mean, they don't have to rush into that. They could do that exclusively, and it doesn't have to be centered around the Taz or the Team Taz thing. But we'll see what they do. They had a real quick hype promo for whatever they are doing with Nyla Rose, Jade Cargill, and Thunder Rosa. The only thought coming out of it for me was wondering why Thunder Rosa is doing video packages right now, and all the while AEW insists on pushing Allie, Penelope Ford, and the rest of the interchangeable blonde squad. Up next was the Beta Bucks and Adam Cole versus Christian Cage and the Jurassic Express. Well, this match ended up getting pretty fucking stupid relatively quickly. Shouldn't be surprised, it's a Bucks match. What else would I expect? I mean, copy and paste every multi-man AEW tag match you've ever seen. That's what this was. Illegal partners going in and out of the match. Overly choreographed spots where you could tell everyone was cooperating with one another to pull them off. Some cool moments here and there, but by and large, most of it gets overshadowed by all the stupid bullshit they pile on top of it. Like the spot where Cole had Jungle Boy in the camel clutch and the Bucks are running the ropes for like 45 seconds just so they could kiss Cole on the cheek. Just rolled my eyes at that. Luchasaurus did a lot of cool shit here. I really liked the deal where he was taking out Cole and the Bucks by himself with a bunch of spinning kicks. And I really liked the spot where he had Cole and one of the betas, I think it was Nick. He had Cole goozled for a regular chokeslam, and he had Nick goozled kind of like with his hand backwards, and he basically gave Nick a reverse chokeslam while simultaneously chokeslamming Cole on top of him. That was awesome. But, you know, like I said before, it was a cool spot that got quickly shrouded by more garbage. There was a cool spot toward the end where Jungle Boy leapt off of Matt's back to give Nick a giant suplex from the top rope, and then Christian immediately follows with a diving headbutt from across the ring. Great finish idea. Keyword finish. Of course, it was only a near fall, because gotta get your shit in. Am I right? And fast forward to the end, Beta Bucks, Christian, and Jungle Boy are fighting on the rampway. Bucks end up throwing the baby faces off the floor. And that leaves Cole and Luchasaurus in the ring to do stuff for a while. Cole eventually hits the Panama Sunrise, which just looked totally ridiculous given the size difference. And Bucks did the BTE trigger deal. Cole hit his last call shot and pins the dinosaur. At least the right guy went over here. Thank God for small favors. I think this Adam Cole experiment is showing its true colors pretty rapidly. Dude just can't help himself. He's a great talent on his own. He's a great promo on his own. He has all the potential in the world to make a difference in this product, but I mean, you pair Cole up with the Beta Bucks and the Elite Goons, he's exposed. He's going to do every stupid Elite trope in the book. He's going to try to get way too cute with his matches, and he's going to fall into the proverbial trap of everything that makes the Bucks so unbearable to watch every week. You know? And part of the reason I hate this so much is because this is why I got cold on Adam during his final run with Ring of Honor. You know, when he was working with Kyle O'Reilly and they were doing the Future Shock deal, they were great. When they were building up Cole and getting ready to put the world title on him, and you know, he was getting more comfortable in his singles role, he was cutting good promos, which was a rarity in Ring of Honor, let's be frank. He was great. But goddamn, when they started implementing all that Bullet Club BS and he started doing all the no-sell PWG style garbage matches with the Bucks, that's where I tapped out. I just couldn't deal with it. You know, in a lot of ways, WWE sort of saved Cole's career, despite what people might have you believe. Because when they separated Cole from the Bucks and, you know, they put Cole in the Undisputed Era and he learned how to actually be a pro wrestler and learn how to actually be a character, he was phenomenal. And he still got talent, which is why this is so frustrating. You know, but now that I'm seeing Cole in this Elite environment again, it's bringing in bad flashbacks. Then we had the Scorpio Sky Ethan Page versus Chris Jericho Jake Hager match. I like Ethan and Scorpio as a duo. Still not really digging the whole American Top Team deal, but you know, they're a solid match. You know, they work well together. I like the matching gear. They play off each other well in the matches. As far as action goes, match was perfectly adequate. Probably the best Jericho's looked in a long time. The finish was kind of weird in the sense that Hager's running wild on Scorpio. He's hitting the ropes and he's doing all these crazy fiery comeback moves, and Dan Lambert swipes at his ankle, and somehow this immediately leads to Scorpio cradling up Hager in a small package to pin him. It wasn't a bad finish. I just thought it was odd. Like, a minute prior, Hager was a house of fire and totally dominating the action. All it took was one ankle snatch, and that was enough to throw Hager off his game and give the heels the advantage. Anyway, they did the post-match deal with Jericho and Page pulling Lambert into the ring, teasing they were going to beat his ass, and well, then a bunch of MMA guys started wandering down to the ring, and I don't watch MMA, so I had no idea who any of these guys were. Excalibur mentioned all their names, but I mean, it made no difference to me either way. So, long story short, they get in the ring. Everyone's starting to gang up on the baby faces. They're just getting fucking mutilated in there by these thugs. And mind you, this was not a hit and run kind of beatdown. This is a 2 to 3 minute long savage beatdown. All the while, the only thing I'm thinking the entire time this is going on, where the hell is the rest of the inner circle? Did they all get explosive diarrhea and get locked in the bathroom? Oh, well, as it turns out, Santana and Ortiz were out in the very next segment, peachy and happy as ever. Like nothing ever happened. Like their teammates didn't just get fucking neutered by a bunch of MMA muggers. Apparently they don't watch the program. Can't blame them. And speaking of this 6-man with Hardy Enterprises and the Lucha Bros and Santana and Ortiz. I mean, I don't really have a whole lot to say about it. I already watched one garbage multi-man match earlier on, and I really didn't need another one. There was some more drivel here with the Matt Hardy Orange Cassidy story, which, I mean, they can try until they're blue in the face. I don't care about the possibility of Cassidy getting his head shaved. I don't care about the probability that Jack Evans gets his head shaved. And I really don't care about the higher probability that Matt Hardy gets his head shaved. In fact, I would be more on board with Matt going away and never showing up on my television ever again. Maybe if this was a career versus hair match, it would be more enticing. So, not ruling the match out, just give me a stip that would favor my benefits more. We had a quick deal with Sammy Guevara and Fuego del Sol coming out with the giant text cards. Miro jumped both of them, laid them both out, threw Fuego off the stage with a Beal, which did look pretty cool. And Taz and Ricky had a good laugh at it. Again, because they're great heels. The lull of the second hour continues here with this Anna Jay Penelope Ford match. Brutal. And the closer for the night was this lights out match with Jon Moxley and Eddie Kingston versus Minoru Suzuki and Lance Archer. Because when in doubt, street fight. I was trying to think of something clever to rhyme with doubt. I failed. Tell you the truth, as far as hardcore matches go, this is pretty low-key in comparison to a lot of AEW street fights go. And they didn't do anything outrageously dumb or death-defying. There were no pizza cutters either, which was a major plus. Plus, they didn't try to set the ring on fire. Story, for the most part, kind of centered around the deal where Mox got his wrists duct taped behind his back, and Archer and Suzuki just spent 5 or so minutes beating him down and whipping him around with a leather belt. The whole thing with Archer beating up the ring crew geeks was dumb. I mean, I get it's his gimmick. Did the same thing in New Japan. I don't care. It's fucking stupid. Anyway, Eddie ended up making a fiery comeback toward the end. Heels cut him off briefly. We get the spot where Suzuki sets up the 2 chairs so Archer can hit Eddie with the blackout, which honestly wouldn't have surprised me if Eddie would have actually been stupid enough to take that bump. But instead, music hits, and we get the debut of Homicide. I think it's his debut. Although with AEW, it's so hard to tell. I mean, guys sort of just phase in and out so frequently, you can never really tell if it's a one-off or if they're actually under contract. I mean, he got theme music and graphics and everything, so I presume that he's signed with the company. Anyway, he ran in from the crowd with a chair. He very briefly gave the heels a shot with the chair before getting cut off. So that's always an effective way to debut someone. Let them get their flurry of offense for all of 8 seconds before laying them out like a schlub. Great booking strategy there. At least they didn't have him try to climb out of a red bird cage this time. Thanks for that one, Russo. Anyway, the Homicide debut was kind of just a transitional spot so he could free Moxley from the tape and Moxley could hit the paradigm shift on the heels. I did kind of get a kick out of the finish with Eddie just going ham on Archer inside the trash can with the kendo stick. I think he was going for some climactic finish deal where he breaks the stick over his leg and fires up the crowd, but of course the stick just kind of bent, so he's like, fuck it, and he just keeps wailing on Archer inside the garbage can several more times before pinning him. It was alright. Good main event. Crowd liked it. Wasn't so overly ludicrous that it made me sick to my stomach, so I'll give it a thumbs up. And that kind of put a closure to, well, certainly not as good of a show as Dynamite was on Wednesday. And this is a real chore to sit through. Now you know why I say this show should never be 2 hours? I mean, look, I get they needed to have 2 hours for the amount of stuff they were planning for the show, but I mean, it doesn't mean I'm wrong. I mean, you could have easily made the show an hour, and I think it would have been much better. And you do the CM Punk Powerhouse Hobbs match in the opener. You do the stupid Elite Six-Man, maybe sprinkle in a couple interviews here and there, and you close out the night with the Lights Out match. That way you got plenty of variety with the ring styles. You can cut out all the meaningless bullshit. You don't burn out the crowd. Because that was the other problem with this show, was the fact that it was taped either before or after Dynamite Wednesday. I don't remember, but I mean, you had to know you weren't going to be able to keep the crowd invested into 4 consecutive hours of wrestling. I mean, even the AEW Smart Mark crowd doesn't have that high of an attention span. So, by and large, not a good show. I like the Hobbs-Punk match, minus the part where Hobbs almost died. The Cole Bucks versus J.E. Christian six-man had a couple cool moments, but I hate the Bucks' style of wrestling, so I can never get fully into anything they're involved with. The Jericho Hager Page Scorpio match was fine, but didn't really need to be on the show. Could have done that on Dynamite next week. The 8-man clusterfuck tag match with all the independent reject guys sucked. The women's match, enough said. And the main event was all right, but by this point in the show, I was just kind of burnt out and ready for everything to be over. Only thing we can hope for is that Dynamite's better. They had one really good TV show on Wednesday, one match of the year contender, and an easy 2-hour show to sit through. And they followed it up with an habitual paint-by-numbers AEW show I'm used to seeing. I'm sorry if you don't like hearing that, but I calls it as I sees it. So, detoxing from the chaotic nature of AEW, I watched NWA the following day, and God, to say these shows are polar opposites would be an understatement. So, I guess NWA Powerrr and Powerrr Surge are 2 different shows. The Surge show is more dedicated to exclusive content and interviews. The matches look like they're taped as dark matches, and they don't do podium interviews or promos or anything. So, even though the show still technically airs on the same day as Powerrr, the presentations of both shows are a little different. I mean, I didn't hate the show. Kind of like the different feel. And granted, the wrestling kind of takes a back seat, but you know what? I mean, I already watched 2 companies that try to cram in way too much wrestling into a short time span, and most of them suck, let's be honest. So, if we get a show where they spend more time doing interviews and building up stories, I'll take that. Marshay Rocket versus Colby Carino opened the program, and I know last week I kind of made the joke that I mistook Carino for Austin Aries. I didn't realize they were practically the same size either. As noted, it looked like they taped most of the matches this week as dark matches. There was still reacting though, which is weird. I mean, I would presume that they were all behind the hard cam. It's a weird formatting thing. Like, if you're gonna have people out there to react to the matches, why not just put them in front of the camera so we can see them? It just doesn't really make sense to me. Pretty standard pro wrestling match, but it's the kind of wrestling I like. Rocket dominated early on by throwing Carino around like a rag doll. Carino ended up cutting off Rocket at the knee for the heat, worked him over for a while. Very brief comeback at the end for Rocket, but Carino schoolboys him, grabs the tights, and steals the win. We had a Jax Dane interview with, I think he's one of the NWA post-show YouTube vloggers. And they covered a lot of ground in this interview, but I actually really liked the way they did this. It had a podcast interview feel to it. And, while that's definitely out of the realm of what we typically see, particularly with the NWA, I kind of like the way they did this. It took a hell of a while for the interviewer to spit out a goddamn question, so Dane ended up taking over the first part of it and ran down all of his accolades as a multi-time champion. They covered the Crimson story from last week. I guess the idea is that they were a tag team at one point, but I guess Crimson tried to step out on his own, so Dane took initiative and ended the team so he can pursue the world title. Talked about Trevor Murdoch for a bit. Dane basically said that Murdoch indirectly called him out in his promo weeks back when he talked about wanting the biggest and baddest men to challenge him. And apparently Dane and Crimson are going to fight in a steel cage at NWA's next pay-per-view event. Not sure when that's taking place, but sounds like it could be a fun ordeal. Plus, it'll actually be a cage match that's warranted, and I don't have to watch them do no-selling 720 corkscrew planchas off the top of the cage to glass and sharp projectiles, and then kick out at 2. I think Dan Lambert is actually kind of growing on me. The segment wasn't all perfect. The interviewer did make the grave error of referring to Dane's future title shot as a championship opportunity. Oh, God. He's been bitten by the WWE bug. Other than that, good segment here. It's nice to actually hear genuine promos from real men for a change. We had a sit-down with Camille, which was just another standard split-screen interview. And couldn't tell for sure, but I'm almost 100% positive that Joe Galley was conducting this interview from a middle school classroom. Anyway, they kind of bickered and bantered with each other for a while, talked about Melina. Camille's all pissed that people were saying that she blindsided her last week. Galley basically asked her if Melina were to lay out a challenge, would Camille accept it? And essentially her argument was that Melina's not a threat, so she'll take her head on, no problem. Interview was fine. Camille's still kind of an awkward promo, but I think she's getting better. So, get ready to feel empowered with Sky Blue versus Tootie Lynn versus Thunder Kitty. Bold, brave, and beautiful. Especially Thunder Kitty, man. Wrestling part-time at 100 years of age. Whew. True inspiration right there. It's funny because she's still better than like 80% of the AEW women's roster. Well, I felt quite empowered here. Quite empowered to fast forward. We had an interview with Trevor Murdoch. They very briefly touched on Nick Aldis for a minute, but segued into who Murdoch perceives as potential world title challengers. And they kind of ran down the gamut of people, talked about Pope for a bit, and he put over his credentials. Murdoch did make an odd statement about Pope, though. He said that Pope was a champion in every company he stepped into. Did Pope ever win championships in WWE or TNA? I remember Pope got a world title push at one point in TNA. I think it was like right toward the beginning of the Hogan Bischoff regime. But I don't think they ever put the title on him, right? And I never remember Pope winning any belts in WWE, that's for sure. I remember he had a bunch of horrible matches with CM Punk, but that's about it. Anyway, Murdoch covered some ground with Jax Dane. Somehow he got on the subject of Scion, who... Isn't he the masked dude that was taking part in that tag team tournament with no brackets? Not really sure why he was brought up. The point with everything is that Murdoch's on the hit list for most guys right now, but, he's salivating at the thought of it. Talked about his new t-shirt for sale. Great plug. Talked about the meaning behind the "everyone is a tough guy until they meet one" quote. And I'm sure it'll sell because, people actually wouldn't be embarrassed to walk around with a pro wrestling t-shirt that read something like "everyone is a tough guy until they meet one." Certainly more manly and striking than a fucking Beta Buck super kick party shirt. Ain't getting your notch count up wearing that attire out in public. It's it's just so fucking weird to me that we are in such a pitiable state with the wrestling business now, where of all people, Trevor Murdoch is one of my favorite wrestlers on the market today. I mean, Trevor seems like a nice guy, don't get me wrong, but like, I don't know, like, you ask your average everyday wrestling fan, who's your favorite wrestler in the business today? And yeah, you'll probably get answers ranging from guys like Roman Reigns to Kenny Omega to CM Punk to Bryan Danielson to Brock Lesnar. You ask me who my favorite wrestler in the business today is, I would probably tell you with a straight face, Trevor Murdoch. No nonsense, old school, button down, southern badass world champion with relatable character qualities and a true passion for the business. And it's funny, it's actually kind of what gravitated me toward Tim Storm a couple years ago when NWA was kickstarting back up. You may be a mama's boy, but goddamn son, you will not catch me in an alleyway messing with Tim Storm. And the main event was Black G's versus Mims. And, I really didn't pay much attention to the match, if I'm being honest. Who even won? I wrote down Mims, but God only knows if I remember how. Who cares? Like I said, the wrestling matches are completely secondary on this show. But generally, this is a fun show to watch. The interviews were well done. I really love the in-depth explanations they give for their story content. They actually take time to explain the rationales for why wrestlers are doing the things they're doing. It really is a stark contrast to anything we see in WWE or AEW. And like, I'm not trying to shit can either of those companies, but when you watch the two, counting Rampage, that's 3 shows each week where I'm essentially watching breakneck wrestling programming from start to finish. Sometimes Rampage gets it right with the way they format the show and limiting the content they run in that 1 hour time span, but they still run into similar problems from time to time. But NWA just feels like a whole different kind of wrestling company right now. It feels like the kind of wrestling that I grew up watching. So, I don't know, maybe there's a little bit of a bias there, but I appreciate what the NWA does. Let's just leave it at that. I know it's kind of a blanket statement, but without it me coming across like I'm sucking their you-know-what, it's just, this is the way that I interpret it when I watch this company. And by and large, the shows aren't incredibly earth-shattering, and they're not vying for any form of competition with the 2 big organizations anytime in the next millennia, but they don't need to. They got a style and a flavor that works for them, and they're sticking to it. I still wish the roster had more depth than it does, but it's really out of their control when WWE and AEW have the ability to basically sign virtually anyone to a big money contract. I pretty much presume the talents like Ricky Starks and Eli Drake, Thunder Rosa, just to name a few, they were going to be on other companies' radars. And especially if you're a Ricky Starks and you're really just starting to find your footing in this business, why wouldn't you take that contract? You'd be stupid to pass up on something like that. All right, and as per usual, we will close out the reporting this week by going to the G1 Climax. And this is nights 4 and 5 that I will be running down here real briefly. I'm going to try to be as rapid fire as I can with a lot of these matches, but I'll still try to make it thorough. Starting with the B block from night 4, opening block round match began with Hiroki Goto and Hiroshi Tanahashi. Pretty simple story with Tanahashi working over Goto's left knee for bulk of the match, and in the finish, both men were doing some reversals. Goto kept going for the GTR, and finally, Tanahashi countered it into a small package and got a pretty shocking win. At least that's how the commentary team sold it. Not a bad match, but not terribly exciting either. Truth be told, I didn't write a whole lot else down about it. Up next was Chase Owens and Tamatonga. I think they tried to work a lot of this like the Kenta Yujiro match from the other night, where because both guys are Bullet Club members, they kept things very basic for a while. A lot of basic mat wrestling and holds. Definitely picked up the physicality as the match went along. Tama's got a great look, man. If he ever got picked up by WWE, I could see them giving that guy a big push. Chase is a solid worker. Don't really have anything against him. Kind of reminds me of Jay White a little bit in the sense that he's pretty generic looking, doesn't seem to have a whole lot of personality, but on the other hand, maybe there's something there that I just haven't seen yet. I mean, I don't want to rule anything out because, Christ, look how many years it took me to come around to guys like Roderick Strong and Kyle O'Reilly. So, maybe he just needs to come out of his shell. So, it could be that I'm just not seeing the bigger picture yet. Good worker, though. I mean, his wrestling's really polished. The finish was fairly cool, kind of Randy Orton-esque. Chase is running wild, gets a couple false finishes over Tonga, hits him with a V-trigger, goes for the package pile driver, but Tonga reverses it into a stun gun finisher for the 3 out of nowhere. Needed another opportunity to use that one. But, yeah, another match that I didn't take copious amounts of notes for. It was kind of ironic that the Bullet Club match involving the 2 Bullet Club members, where you think there would be interference and shenanigans, they ended up just wrestling it straight with no run-in garbage. Oh, and lo and behold, it actually turned out to be a better match in result. Third round was Jeff Cobb versus Yoshihashi. Speaking of guys WWE would push to the moon if they ever got a hold of him, how about Jeff Cobb? You think Vince wouldn't take one look at that guy and say, "God damn it, pal, this Cobb guy's big. Strap the rocket to this guy. He's going straight to the top." Of course, his name wouldn't be Jeff Cobb. It'd probably be something like Demetrius Braxton or something completely preposterous. I really like the layout of this match in particular. You got a big, muscular powerhouse facing off against, definitely not a cruiserweight, but someone who was still giving up pretty significant size. So they just had Cobb beat on Yoshihashi for a good chunk of it. Hashi got a momentary flurry of offense where he worked over Cobb's left leg. Cobb cut him off again and threw him around for a little bit. Cobb's got a great-looking standing drop kick and belly-to-belly, by the way. Wasn't a particular fan of the standing moonsault spot from Cobb. It looked beautiful, but I usually don't like it when big guys do flips, unless it's really called for or, unless it's the finish. I didn't like the Canadian Destroyer spot either, but, check out every AEW recap I've ever done, and you'll hear me ranting about a Canadian Destroyer near-fall spot at some point in there. Yoshihashi ended up making a real nice comeback at the end, got a couple great false finishes. Cobb ended up giving Hashi some kind of shoulder tackle or spear. Either way, it looked awesome. Sent Hashi flailing through the air. And finally, Cobb snatched up Yoshihashi into his arms, hit the Tour of the Islands for the pin, and that was that. Real good match. Didn't really know what to expect going in, but both guys worked hard, told a good story. It worked their character roles perfectly. Jeff Cobb seems to be showing a little bit more personality, too. Remember a couple years ago, I vaguely remember talking about how he's a good athlete, but kind of had a dry personality, didn't seem like he was really coming out of his shell a whole lot. And he was showing and displaying a lot of character elements here, so good on him. That brought us to Sonata and Taichi in the 4th round. Talked about this on my Night 2 recap about Taichi. Saw him in the G1 a couple years back. Really don't like his style of match all that well. He's got personality, but it reminds me too much of Toriano's matches. Too many gimmicks, too many shenanigans, too much BS. An example of this occurring within a few minutes into the match where Sonata and Taichi literally stopped wrestling so that they could partake in a brief peck-off. And unless it's Scott Steiner leading the charge, I really have no interest in seeing guys flex their pecs. Other than the pec standoff, the only thing I hated about this, and I see this in almost every main event style New Japan match, I hate the uninterrupted no-sell offensive flurry spots. I understand it's an element of the Japanese wrestling style that I guess people just have become accustomed to over the years, but it always bothers me. I'm usually okay with it if guys are trading blows or chops. As long as they're laying into each other and they're making it look real, I can at least buy that as credible. But when a guy gets dropped with a back suplex and he immediately springs back up and hits a clothesline, and then the other guy immediately springs back up and hits a lariat, and then the other guy springs back up and plants him with a DDT, and it's spot with no rhyme or reason. That's where I draw the line. It's that kind of indie bullshit that I used to see in PWG, and unfortunately it's translated to mainstream wrestling, probably on a much graver scale. I mean, the only defense I can give it is at least when they do it in New Japan, it's not like something ridiculous like a 450 splash landing on your stomach, and then the other guy does a fucking 620 corkscrew inside out ass drop, and then the other guy rolls out of the way and immediately springs back up and does some kind of rope walk into a fucking DDT that's no-sold into a fucking tombstone, which is no-sold into a super kick, which is no-sold into another super kick, which is sold into a pile driver through the ring, which the guy kicks out at 2 anyway. Did I just really go on that tangent? My God. All right. Aside from that, the work was real solid here. Didn't enjoy it quite as much as the Cobb Yoshihashi match, but the action was good. And they barely passed the 25-minute mark, too, and Taichi ended up going over with the Black Mephisto move. They mentioned this a little later on in the Okada match when the announcers were discussing win streaks. Apparently, Sonata was on a 7-match win streak going in here, and that streak was broken after dropping this match to Taichi. So that's kind of interesting. And then that brought us to Evil and Kazuchika Okada in the main event. I do have to point this out before I get going. There's something strangely comedic about Kevin Kelly getting pissed when the wrestlers inadvertently take out the announce team's ringside. I don't know, it's amusing to me. I also laughed at the spot toward the finish where Evil throws Red Shoes in front of Okada, and after he takes the bump, you can blatantly hear Okada just scream, "Fuck!" It's still so odd to see how New Japan does ref bumps over how it's done here in the States. Like in New Japan, a ref gets taken out, and he's just up on his feet a minute later, and he's perfectly fine. But you have a ref get taken out in WWE or AEW, it's like, may as well just put him on a ventilation machine. This might sound strange, especially considering how New Japan usually structures their cards. I thought this is a pretty weak main event. And there were some good moments, especially once we reached the halfway mark, but generally, I did not think that this match topped the Cobb Hashi or even the Sonata Taichi match. I mean, obviously the Bullet Club interference was going to bring it down a notch or two, but I mean, even that stuff was kept to a bare minimum until the finishing sequence. They went back and forth for a while. Okada made a small comeback toward the end, had the usual deal where he does the Rainmaker pose, and it leads to absolutely nothing out of consequence except a camera pan out and 5 to 6 more minutes of wrestling. And after all the run-ins, all the ref bumps, all the heel distractions, all the Crash TV stuff at the end, Okada makes a valiant babyface comeback, hits Evil with his patented Rainmaker, and gets the win. I mean, it wasn't bad, but I guess I always expect the main event matches for New Japan shows to be far and away superior to the rest of the card, at least better than the mid-card matches. Like I said, I'm going out on a limb and saying it's a toss-up between Cobb versus Yoshihashi or Sonata versus Taichi as match of the night. Kind of leaning toward Cobb versus Hashi just because I like the story they told better. But for an Okada match, blech. Definitely not up to snuff with his match with Tanahashi from night 2, that's for sure. And that brought us to the A block round for night 5. And before I get into logistics, I really should point out that the Naito injury is really given perspective as to just how lacking the star power is in this A block. I mean, this block really needed a Will Ospreay or a Jay White to give it more oomph. And yes, I know about the Ospreay injury, so there's not a whole lot you can do, but there's something missing here. I mean, the B block at least has Okada and Tanahashi as sort of the bigger attractions to give it plenty of credibility. I like Ishii and Saber Jr., but I mean, since I've watched New Japan, they were never two guys that were pushed heavily in the world title or top level programs. So, it's strange. Shingo Takagi wrestled Yuji Nagata in a prelim match, but I decided to skip over it since it was essentially a Shingo replacement match for the Naito match. Kind of seems like it's going to be Nagata's booking for the remainder of the A block. Hey, just go out there and do jobs for everyone that was supposed to wrestle Naito. What a gig. So the first match that I watched here was Yujiro Takahashi and the Great Okan. I mean, fairly bland match. I think part of the problem here for me is my lack of background knowledge with either guy, so I guess I didn't have really any investment in it. I mean, action was alright, I just couldn't get into it. Although, I guess it's kind of interesting that the Great Okan is at the top of the A block in point lead right now. I wonder if that means he'll end up dropping the remainder of his tournament matches. Because I think at this point, he's faced sort of the bottom of the barrel in the tournament. The rest of his opponents are the head of the pack. So, it's interesting. I'm particularly interested to see what he does with the Xiii. Tonga Loa and Toru Yano was the next match, and I'm going to be honest, I barely paid a lick of attention to it. Yano's matches suck. He's a total gimmick, and it's not even like the goofy shit he does is ever inventive. Santino Marella was a stupid gimmick, but at least he was talented enough to innovate himself as a character over the years. Yano, it's the same garbage every time. Ringside shenanigans, teases that he'll get counted out, but always breaks the count at the last second, rips the turnbuckle pad off, ref bumps, low blows, and cheap pins. At least they limited the bullshit with the tape and handcuffs. Trish. What wasn't Trish was the semi-main and main event for this show. Kenta and Tomohiro Xiii in the semi-main. I know I've been none too kind to Mr. Kenta in recent recaps, but whether it was him or Xiii pulling a good match out of him, I'll take it. Kenta did his early stalling tactics, but Xiii quickly took the fight to him and pretty much kept things at a high level of intensity in the early goings. They had Kenta work the arm, which Xiii pretty much sold throughout the match. Did a real nice job with that. I like the long submission tease with Kenta putting Xiii in the game over, but Xiii fought to the ropes. Because if I'm not mistaken, I think that's how Kenta beat Yujiro in the previous match. Now, I know Kenta typically uses the GTS as a finish, but I always like it when guys have to pull out different moves in their arsenal because, maybe a signature move that worked to finish a previous guy doesn't work for someone of higher stature and more experience. They did some more exchanges toward the end, and Kenta ended up ramming Xiii into the exposed turnbuckle and rolled him up by his tights to steal the pin. Like I said before, good stuff. Best Kenta match I've seen since his return to New Japan, and it's 2 years ago? I mean, keep in mind, the last New Japan show I watched was right before the bug hit, so it's been a while. And then we had the main event for the night, Zack Saber Jr. versus Kota Abushi. And unfortunately for Kenta, even though he had a great showing, still got outshined on the main event of this show. This is a hell of a match for both guys. Abushi's got lightning quick kicks, bro. Incredible how fast that guy can strike. There was a really cool sequence early on in the match where, Abushi kept attacking the thigh and quad area of Zack with the kicks. And Zack would try some kind of offensive strike or technical move, and Abushi would just keep reversing it and hitting him with the kicks to the thigh, and Zack got visibly frustrated and just eventually said, "Fuck it, I'm out." He just left the ring. I guess it kind of makes sense, too, with the announcers playing up the whole brash, pouty, petulant nature of Zack when he gets shown up. So, it's good that they're paying attention to character continuity. And they actually played up that element throughout a good chunk of the match. Basically, they talked about how Zack's style is not on par with the striking exchange level of Abushi, so every time Zack would go to try and engage with him, he'd basically get his ass kicked. So, I mean, it was funny, but, it was a cool story. And they basically built up to the finishing deal where Abushi kept trying for the Kamigoye, but right as Abushi thought he had control over Zack's wrist, Zack reverses it, locks in some cool-looking submission hold on Abushi, and got him to verbally submit. And I really love the story they're cultivating with Zack right now. Having him submit Naito, Takagi, and Abushi all in succession. And the great thing about it is that he's not using one specific hold to win. And off the top of my head, I can't remember what he used to submit Naito. I know he beat Takagi with the triangle. And here, I don't even know what the fuck he called this, but I mean, he basically contorted every limb on Abushi to the point where he had to verbally give up because he didn't have a free arm to physically tap. But I like the story they're running with here because it basically plants the narrative that Zack has so much in his arsenal offensively that, you know, he's got to keep guys on their toes because you never know what kind of submission hold he's going to pull out of his rear at the last second. Because that's the other thing, too. It's like he's won all of his matches via submission, but I think most of them have basically come when his opponent was trying for some kind of signature move or offensive move, and then Zack would trap him in a hold, and that would lead to the finish. So it's not like Zack was ever in complete control of the match prior to the submission. So, yeah, it's a really cool story they're running with right now. And I'll say this. The A block is really hurting for star power, but they've easily got the best story going on right now with Zack out of either block. I'm kind of hoping they just have him beat everyone else in the tournament via submission and just bulldoze his way into the finals undefeated. Because at this point, I see no reason to beat him. I mean, he's already beaten the top 3 guys in the block. I mean, his really only actual challenge at this point is a Xiii. God help us all if they actually managed to have him lose to fucking Toriano of all people. So, I mean, we'll see what they do there. Guys, if you want to keep posted with the channel, make sure you subscribe, comment, and rate this video. Again, that is 2 weekly shows we host here on YouTube, Monday and Friday. I will be back this coming Friday for the NXT and Dynamite rundown, and off the top of my head, I'm honestly not sure where I'll be caught up with the G1 by Friday. I believe the next 2 shows are taking place on the 29th and the 30th. And if that's the case, then I should have both blocks viewed and prepared to recap for Friday's show. So, sounds like I'll still generally be on some kind of good track. So that's good. Until then, take care, everyone. Thanks for watching.